Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, we have a really massive topic today. Are we caught in a cosmic battle between God and the devil, or is evil simply a biological glitch in our brain wiring? Today, we are tearing down the boundaries between ancient theology and modern neuroscience. We'll explore whether humanity actually needs an all-seeing God to behave, or if science and evolutionary psychology can explain away our darkest impulses.
It is a massive friction point, honestly. I
Yeah.
mean, we are looking at this collision between the very sterile, measurable world of medical imaging in maximum security prisons.
Right.
And then, the ancient sun-baked theological frameworks that were built in the tombs of Egypt. The entire goal today is to really dissect the true nature of what we label as evil.
Exactly. And before we wade into the deep end of that philosophical pool, I want to take a quick second to say, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Because this deep dive is custom tailored for you. We are trying to figure out where evil actually originates from.
Yeah, does morality necessitate a divine creator?
Or is an omniscient God just this, evolutionary survival story we've been telling ourselves for thousands of years just to keep society from completely collapsing?
To properly evaluate that, especially from an atheistic and scientific standpoint, we have to start with the physical hardware, the actual brain.
The meat of it, yeah.
Exactly. And the work of neuroscientist Dr. Kent Keel provides a really chilling counterargument to the traditional religious concept of sin.
He does.
He has spent years taking these mobile MRI machines directly inside maximum security prisons.
Which is wild to even picture.
It is. He's scanning the brains of psychopathic criminals,
Yeah.
literally looking for a biological blueprint for evil.
And there's one specific case that really anchors this. Dr. Keel's research centers on this one particular inmate who scored in the 99th percentile for psychopathy.
That's an incredibly rare classification, 1 in a million.
1 in a million, yeah. This is a man with a long, brutal history, a serial rapist and murderer. And when he was interviewed about the atrocities he committed, there was just zero remorse, complete absence of it.
Nothing at all.
He described his actions as this spur-of-the-moment impulse, an impulse that he just couldn't switch off. And the most striking thing he told the interviewer, his own sort of self-diagnosis, he simply said he wasn't wired the same as everybody else.
He literally used the word wired.
Yes. And okay, let's unpack this. Because when Dr. Keel actually looked at the MRI results for this guy, that phrase wasn't just a metaphor.
No, it's a stark medical reality.
It really was. In this inmate's brain, the orbital frontal cortex, which is the region that handles your impulse control, your empathy, personality regulation, it was visibly reduced. It was atrophied.
It lacked the actual physical tissue necessary to generate a moral compass.
Which is terrifying, but it forces this massive reevaluation of how we even define morality.
It absolutely does. Because think about it from a mechanical standpoint. If a car has no brake pads, we don't call the car evil when it crashes into a wall.
Right, you just call a mechanic.
Exactly. We recognize a catastrophic mechanical failure. But in the theological framework, sin is defined as a deliberate, conscious rebellion against a divine moral order.
You have to choose to do the bad thing.
Right. But if an individual is walking around with a biologically deformed orbital frontal cortex, and they are literally incapable of physically processing empathy, the atheistic perspective would argue that their horrific actions aren't a spiritual failing at all.
It's just a tragic, extreme medical deficit.
Exactly.
And man, that raises some deeply uncomfortable questions for the justice system too. Are we punishing a moral failing, or are we criminalizing a neurological handicap?
That is the debate. And it gets even heavier when you look at the developmental data Dr. Keel gathered following the Sandy Hook school shooting.
Oh, right, the youth studies.
Yes.
Huh.
His team scanned the brains of youths, specifically 10 to 12-year-old kids who had already committed homicide.
Which is a heavy demographic to even study.
It's incredibly grim.
Yeah.
But they compared those scans to incarcerated youths who hadn't killed, and they discovered that underdeveloped temporal lobes could actually predict high-risk homicidal behavior.
Wow.
Now, I want to be very careful here to avoid falling into strict biological determinism.
Yeah.
Just because a child has an underdeveloped temporal lobe does not mean they are destined to become a killer. Environmental factors, childhood trauma, social support, they all play massive roles in how that biology expresses itself.
It's a combination of nature and nurture.
Precisely. However, the secular implication of this data is undeniable. I mean, I want you to think about this. If science can physically identify and predict the capacity for evil in a 10-year-old child's brain, Does that rule out the idea of moral choice?
Right. Does it rule out spiritual consequence?
Because if your biology drastically stacks the deck toward violence from birth, the idea of eternal damnation starts to look like a mismatch for the reality of human anatomy.
It really does. So if science suggests that at least some portion of human evil is just a mechanical failure of the brain, a biological glitch, why did human civilization universally develop the concept of a supernatural antagonist?
Right, where did the literal devil come from?
Exactly. If it's just biology, why the pitchforks and horns? To trace that, we have to look at how ancient societies managed morality before they had mobile MRI machines.
We have to go back in time.
Way back. Let's travel to Luxor, Egypt. We're talking around 1370 BC, to the ancient tombs of the nobles, specifically the tomb of Mena.
What's fascinating here is that the artwork in Mena's tomb offers one of the earliest recorded visual manifestations of an external cosmic justice system.
The weighing of the heart scene.
Exactly.
And what stands out about this isn't just the mythology, but how painfully literal the ancient Egyptians were about it. You see Mena standing before Osiris, the god of the underworld.
And what happens?
His physical heart is taken out and placed on a scale, counterbalanced by Mut, the goddess of truth. They didn't view sin as just a spiritual stain on your record. They believed that if Mena lied or cheated or acted maliciously during his life, his actual heart would physically gain weight.
It would get heavy.
Yes, a heavy heart meant the scale would tip and he would be denied entry into the afterlife, which is the literal ancient root of calling a good person pure of heart.
Or saying you're doing something with a heavy heart.
Exactly. We are still echoing a 3,500-year-old theological threat today. But here's the thing. While the Egyptians had this cosmic scale, they didn't really have a singular, all-encompassing devil figure who was actively trying to destroy the world.
Right, there wasn't a master of evil.
So where did that specific concept come from?
Well, historical theologians like Professor Gregory Riley point to a really fascinating historical twist involving Zoroastrianism.
Which is an ancient Iranian faith. I
Yes,
think.
roughly 3,500 years old. They used fire as a symbol of enlightenment, but they introduced this stark cosmic dualism. Rather than a system where one deity handles both the good and the bad of the world, Zoroastrianism split the universe right down the middle.
A literal war.
An absolute cosmic war, a god of light fighting a separate, incredibly powerful entity of absolute darkness and evil.
And the turning point for modern Western theology happened during the Babylonian exile. The ancient Israelites, who obviously formed the foundation for the Judeo-Christian tradition, they had their temple destroyed and were conquered by Babylon.
A massive historical trauma.
Massive. And they needed a theological explanation. Why would a supposedly omnipotent, benevolent God allow his chosen people to suffer so catastrophically?
It's the classic problem of evil.
Right. And when they met Zoroastrians during this exile, that dualistic framework offered the perfect solution. It wasn't God causing the suffering.
There's a grand competitor.
Exactly, a cosmic enemy. The Israelites assimilated this idea, brought it back with them, and it evolved into the concept of Satan, or Baal, that we see in modern Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
It is a phenomenal example of theological evolution. From an atheistic perspective, this perfectly illustrates how religions adapt to survive trauma. You build the theology you need to explain the suffering you are experiencing.
You literally adopt a devil to make sense of the world, and what's deeply ironic is how modern Zoroastrians view this concept today.
They've completely shifted.
They really have. They've largely moved away from the literal interpretation of a supernatural monster. They view evil purely as an internal mental struggle. Their whole guiding principle is just good thoughts, good words, good deeds.
Taking personal responsibility.
Right, you don't blame a supernatural beast for your bad behavior. You govern your own actions.
And that pivot from an external demon to an internal moral struggle bridges perfectly into the psychology of belief.
Yes, it does.
Because if the concept of a cosmic watcher is a historical construct, we have to ask why it was so universally adopted across so many cultures.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
The dart throwing experiment.
Yes. Psychologist Jesse Baring conducted this behavioral study with children in New Zealand, and it beautifully illustrates why the human animal might actually biologically require the concept of a god.
It's all about the psychology of the unseen observer.
Exactly. I mean, think about how many of us only drive the exact speed limit when we can visibly see a police car in our rearview mirror.
We've all done it.
Right. So Dr. Baring basically tested that impulse in young kids. He put them in a room with a dartboard, told them to throw darts with their backs to the board and set a strict rule that they could not cross a line on the floor.
And he offered them a highly desirable prize if they won.
Yep. Then he leaves the room.
And, naturally, human nature takes over.
Of course. Hidden cameras catch the kids looking around, checking to make sure they're alone, and then they blatantly step over the line, walk right up to the board, and physically place the darts on the target.
They cheated to win the prize.
Every time. Left alone, they cheated. But the second phase of the experiment is where the atheistic evaluation of religion gets its strongest ammunition.
The introduction of the Watcher.
Yes. Dr. Bering runs the same game with the new group of kids, but this time, before he leaves, he points to an empty chair in the corner of the room, and he tells the kids that a friendly, invisible, magical being named Princess Alice is sitting in that chair. Princess Alice. And he tells them she is going to be watching them play the game.
And the behavioral shift was absolute.
Night and day. When left alone, this second group of children followed the rules. They did not cheat. One little girl even walked over and tentatively touched the empty chair just to check if she could feel the invisible princess sitting there. Just the mere suggestion of an unseen observer fundamentally altered their moral behavior.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Princess Alice is the psychological prototype for God.
Perfectly mirrors the societal function.
It really does. If you look at this through a purely secular anthropological lens, the human belief in an all-seeing moralistic deity who rewards you with heaven and punishes you with hell, it acts as the ultimate psychological police force.
An evolutionary survival tool.
Exactly. Early human tribes that believed they were constantly being watched by a cosmic judge were likely more cooperative. They were less prone to murdering each other over resources.
And therefore more likely to survive and pass on their genes.
It keeps our inherent selfishness in check. Without Princess Alice in the room, the children optimized for their own immediate gain.
Which prompts a really direct question for you, listening to this right now.
Thought experiment.
Yeah. If you strip away every external consequence, no security cameras, no police force, no social judgment from your peers, and absolutely no cosmic deity keeping a tally of your sins, would you rob a bank?
If you were 100% sure no one was watching.
Right. If you were guaranteed to get away with it, does your internal moral compass hold up? Or does humanity actually need the threat of a supernatural observer, the threat of Princess Alice, to prevent a descent into evil?
That tension leads us to examine how different cultures manage the existence of evil without that binary God versus devil dynamic.
Because not everyone has a Princess Alice threatening them with hell.
Exactly. If you don't have a binary structure of a perfect God fighting a purely evil devil, your framework for processing trauma is completely different.
Like the Hindu perspective.
Yes.
Taking a look at Varanasi, India, provides a stark contrast. In this framework, evil isn't viewed as a demonic force trying to drag you into eternal fire.
It's highly localized.
Very localized. When individuals suffer from sudden sickness or severe financial ruin, it is often attributed to the unhappy souls of their own ancestors.
The belief is that a deceased relative is in spiritual pain. They're trapped between worlds, causing chaos for their descendants.
It's just a disruption of familial harmony, not a cosmic attack. And the method of resolution at the sacred pond in Varanasi is fascinating. Head priests perform exorcisms using what they describe as a benign goblin of the god Shiva.
A benign goblin.
Right, and the goal isn't to aggressively banish a demon to hell. The goal is purification. They treat the disruptive spirit with a surprising level of respect. Families will prepare elaborate meals, honey, clarified butter. They even offer the spirit physical items like an umbrella or a pair of shoes.
To help it find peace?
Exactly, to assist it on its journey. You aren't fighting evil. You are comforting a disturbed entity.
Compare that gentle purification to the traditional Christian concept of original sin.
Oh, that's a huge shift.
As discussed by Reverend Kudakela, the framework of original sin suggests that humanity inherited a fundamental bend toward violence and death from Adam and Eve.
A permanent infection.
Right. It implies that every human is born with a latent capacity for profound evil that must be actively suppressed. The Hindu approach treats the darkness as a temporary misalignment.
But whether you view that darkness as a biological infection from birth, an adopted historical concept, or just the unhappy soul of your great-grandfather, the human capacity to actually overcome it is what truly anchors this entire discussion.
The element of human agency.
Yes. And the incredible story of redemption with Brian Wheatner is a visceral demonstration of that.
Brian's case really challenges the biological determinism we discussed earlier with Dr. Keel.
It does. For 16 years, Brian operated as an enforcer for neo-Nazi skinhead gangs.
He was the embodiment of organized hatred.
By his own admission, he was a borderline sociopathic individual who actively wanted to hurt the world. But his turning point wasn't a supernatural vision.
No, it was profoundly human.
He became a father. The sudden responsibility of bringing an innocent life into the world forced a complete psychological collapse of his hateful worldview. He walked away.
But walking away internally was only half the battle.
Right, because his face and neck were covered in prominent neo-Nazi tattoos. He physically looked like the evil he was trying to leave behind. So, to prove his internal change, he committed to an agonizing process of laser tattoo removal.
Which is incredibly painful.
It took 2.5 years, over 25 separate laser treatments on his face and neck. He described the physical toll as smelling burning skin, looking like he had just been in a brutal boxing match every single day.
He embraced it.
He completely embraced it. He explicitly viewed the agony as a physical penance. He knew the immense suffering he had caused, and he willingly absorbed this excruciating pain to balance his own moral scale.
He described his time in the hate groups as living with a hole in his soul.
Yeah.
And during that grueling process of reconstruction, he noted that the void was eventually filled by a godly presence.
Regardless of whether you take a secular view of neuroplasticity or a religious view of divine grace, Brian proves that the belief in goodness, and perhaps the divine, has the tangible power to completely override an individual's capacity for evil.
A human being is not fundamentally locked into their darkest impulses.
Not at all. And we've looked at this from so many angles today. We started with the missing gray matter in a psychopathic killer's brain.
We trace the invention of the devil back to ancient Babylon.
We looked at the psychological trick of an invisible princess keeping kids from cheating at darts.
And finally, the brutal physical penance of a former skinhead finding redemption.
Synthesizing all of this together leaves us in a really interesting spot.
This raises an important question, and it actually brings to mind a concluding thought from Morgan Freeman in the source material.
What was his take?
He posited a deeply challenging idea. Perhaps evil, despite all the horrific suffering it causes, must exist in the world.
That it's necessary.
Yes, that it is the exact catalyst that forces humanity to develop our greatest traits: kindness, mercy, forgiveness. How do we learn the true depth of mercy if there is no injustice to forgive?
You cannot have the light without the dark. It forces us to actively choose our moral framework.
It leaves us at a fascinating intersection of where humanity has been and where our technology might take us next.
Which is exactly what I want to leave you with today. A final, provocative, brand new angle to ponder on your own.
Let's hear it.
If neuroscience continues its rapid advance, let's say one day we can permanently cure the biological impulses of evil with a simple pill or a targeted gene therapy.
Repairing the orbital frontal cortex medically.
Exactly. If we can artificially generate empathy and physically erase the capacity for violence, will we still need the concepts of God, sin, and redemption to guide our lives?
Wow.
Or, if science permanently cures evil, will the invisible Princess Alice in our minds finally fade away?
That is a profound question about the future of the human soul.
Something to definitely think about. Thank you for joining us and thinking deeper alongside us today. We'll catch you next time.